If you're moving through an area of country that's recently had a lot of rain, such as this open woodland in northern Queensland, it pays to keep an eye out on the side of the road for rubbish that's accumulated over the years. Because while being unsightly, rubbish actually provides an ideal microclimate for a lot of creatures to take shelter. You find all sorts of things: frogs, skinks, even snakes, a lot of invertebrates. A whole variety of creatures actually make use of rubbish. They provide a great opportunity to get temporary shelter and refuge in between nights, when animals aren't looking for more long-term refuge. This pile of rubbish here next to me is typical of the rubbish you find on the side of the road. We've got some old real estate signs, an old door, bits of cardboard and some old parts of a car. Now, we're in a very good area here. We're right next to a large water source. There's a river and a little billabong, and we're in pretty good habitat. So I'm going to take a look through this rubbish and see what I can find. And I like to think of a pile of rubbish as a bit like a box of chocolates. You just never know what you're going to find. Okay. When you're sorting through a pile of rubbish, it pays to disturb the top layers as little as possible, because what that tends to do is frighten off anything that might be underneath. So you usually very quietly and delicately remove the top layers, and then when you get to the bottom layer, that's usually where something will be, if there is indeed anything there. Now there's a door here which is going to be the best habitat in this pile of rubbish, so I think that's where I'm going to be concentrating. Right, now we're down to the last layer. And what we've got here is something pretty unusual. I thought this was a cane toad at first glance, but it's actually something a lot more fascinating than that. It's actually, if I'm not mistaken, a northern burrowing frog. And now this is an animal that has a fascinating natural history. This is actually a native Australian frog. It's the northern water-holding frog, and I'm pretty sure its name is Cyclorhina nova hollandi. One fascinating thing about the family of burrowing frogs is that they have this little appendage on the side of their hind legs. And this is actually to aid them in burrowing themselves underground. And they use this to sort of kick backwards and move the soil out of the way, and eventually they just work themselves into the ground. This is an appendage that is characteristic of all burrowing frogs. They've also got some wart-like structures along the underside of the toes, and that's probably also to aid in burrowing. This animal is fantastically adapted to this habitat. This is an area that's characterized by extreme wet and extreme dry. And this animal is able to capitalize on the abundant food supply that is available during the wet, and then it can actually go into aestivation or hibernation during the times when there's no rainfall. This animal can actually go underground and stay there in a cocoon in suspended animation for 2 or 3 years, or possibly even longer. And then when the rains come and food is available again, it'll just come out of the ground and get on with its reproductive cycles. So this is actually a really fascinating animal that has actually come up with a fantastic solution for living in a pretty harsh environment. It burrows underground at the end of the wet season, and then what it does is it sheds its skin in one piece, and then the skin actually keratinizes and forms a cocoon, and it covers its whole body except its nostrils, and this allows it to withhold moisture for possibly years underground. It also has an extra large bladder that allows it to retain large amounts of water that keep it hydrated during this time. So this is actually one of Australia's least known frogs. It's a fairly unusual frog. It's really not commonly found anywhere. It's not abundant anywhere as far as I'm aware, but it has a fascinating natural history. A real little Aussie battler, this guy. He might only feed for 3 or 4 months of the year, and the rest of the time he'll be just underground hibernating. It's been great to find this little guy in the wild. This is the first northern water-holding frog I've ever seen. I've only ever seen them in pictures up until now. As with all animals that I find in the wild, I'm going to handle him for as little as possible, and I'm going to return him to exactly where I found him. So that's what we're going to do right now. Put him in his little depression, and put his door back on him. And then we'll just leave him alone. While the northern water-holding frog is not common anywhere, it can still be found over a large geographical area. Some of Australia's rarest frog species have a very limited distribution, and some occur only within a single river drainage. The Kimberley region in Western Australia is a hotspot where many new species have been discovered over the last 2 or 3 decades, and more than likely a few more are still awaiting discovery. The flight in will take you over some of the most isolated and spectacular coastline in Australia. Landing strips are few and far between, and a short helicopter ride is needed to get you over to the coastline and the gorge country, where a year-round supply of fresh water concentrates the fauna. The cave-dwelling tree frog, Litoria cavernicola, was high on my list of species to find, and luckily after only a few hours of searching, I came across a small colony in a rock crevice. Virtually nothing has been learned about the ecology of this frog since its discovery in 1979. After casting a line and lunch of freshly caught fish, I set out in search of some more frogs. Roth's tree frogs proved abundant and were found in the shade of many of the large boulders littering the floor of the gorge. The rock-owl frog was also plentiful, and dozens were found under almost every rock ledge adjacent to the creek. On first noticing these tiny frogs, they appeared unremarkable, but when I walked over for a closer look, they rapidly took flight and escaped to the other side of the creek by hopping across the surface of the water. I still haven't worked out exactly how they managed to do it. Another one of nature's little unexplained miracles, I guess. Of course, one of the other animal attractions here in the Kimberley is the magnificent green tree frog. This little guy here I caught a couple of minutes ago in a cave up there behind me next to the Aboriginal art that you can see. He was calling last night, and that was quite easy to find. But these are not very common in the pet industry yet. They're probably the most sought after of all Australian frogs. They're not as easy to breed as some, but people have been having some success lately. Very attractive little guy, I think you'll agree. Bright green with white markings on the back. And lovely orangey yellow colour under the limbs. They're pretty similar in behaviour to most of the other larger green tree frogs. But just a beautiful little guy, and just tops off a beautiful day here in the Kimberley.